First, I'd like to ask you how you got interested in comedy and what inspires you to create.
Well, I think I was always really into comedy in general, like growing up, and it was around 16 that I started sort of writing my own jokes, just sort of feeling like I could do this. It was just sort of a thing where I just sort of started being like, I think I could do this also. And I mean, comedy was always just really important to me. Like it was just something that just naturally sort of I gravitated toward as entertainment. And I started doing stand up, like open mics around 17 in high school. I think the first time I was on stage was at like a talent show at this like resort that I think I tied for the win with like a singing family, which seemed pretty impressive, because they'd obviously sung before, several of them. Um, and yeah, then when I started college a year later, I was really into doing stand up there. I joined a sketch comedy show there, and I started doing like my own. So I was doing my own stand up shows. I was doing the sketch show, and then later in college was doing a comic strip, like 3 days a week.
Cool. That's awesome. Thank you. Like many, I'm a big fan of Triumph, the insult comic dog. I was wondering what writing tips you learned from Robert Smigel while working for him, and has he shaped your approach to writing in any way?
Well, the thing about Robert that I've always been really impressed with is he's much more sort of multitasked than I am. Like I really like to focus on things, and he's really impressive because he produces things. So like he's thinking about everything at once. He's really thinking about like every aspect of producing a sketch, and I'm only thinking about the script. Like we'd have stuff we were filming, and he's like talking about costumes and cameras and everything, and I'm like, oh yeah, I should probably pay attention to those things too, not just the words. Uh, I think Robert, long before I worked with him, was really influential to me because I just thought that Triumph is just such a pure joke machine that I really loved. And I think that, like, I look at the stuff that I was writing before I met him, and I've definitely grown. I've definitely learned. I think that with Triumph and specifically with Smigel, there's just a certain amount of sort of joke economy, keeping things very, you know, brief to the exact amount of information you need to convey, as well as just, he's got a great sensibility. It's something you kind of just learn over time. Just he's so like Triumph specifically, but everything Smigel does, it's just hard joke writing. And I think that a lot of people try to find ways around that. They try to find ways around the the mathematical and indisputable joke writing, and they try to replace that with things like anti-comedy and trolling and being bad on purpose or being cute or being relatable. But what he does is straight joke writing, and that's something I've definitely uh, felt really privileged to be a part of, because I felt like Triumph writing is what I was just naturally the most like qualified for. Like when I first, sent Smigel a packet of jokes when he was putting together a staff for the Hulu election show. I remember thinking, if I don't get this, I should just stop writing, because if I can't get this, no one's ever going to hire me. I was also slightly insulted almost the way that so many people that I worked with at SNL, after I was let go of SNL, found out I was a Triumph and were like, "Oh, that's perfect for you." And I'm like, "Yeah, thanks. Not sure what you're trying to say with that." Uh, SNL wasn't that bad either for me, but I guess just Triumph. Okay.
That's a perfect segue because my next question is about your experience with SNL. I'm just wondering, could you take me through the process of sketch writing to read through to rehearsal and then all the way to performing it live on stage?
Well, on Monday, everyone would cram into Lorne's office. They changed that since COVID. I think it's a larger area now, but oh wait, no. No, actually, I think it's back. It's back to Lauren's office. Everyone, all the uh, performers and writers would all get into Lauren's office with the host, and everyone gives them an example of what kind of sketch they want to do. Most people give a joke answer. They just say a joke sketch just to get through that moment. And then the sketch they're going to write is almost never the sketch that they pitched. Some people would pitch the real sketches. I have sometimes would, like Vanessa Bayer would always pitch her real sketch, which is much more helpful. It's what they want, but a lot of people would just sort of just try to say something funny in that moment, um, which is a kind of a weird thing. And then Tuesday is when everyone's supposed to write their sketches. The host will go from office to office and try to spend some time with each set of writers to see what they like, because you want to write something that the host is going to be okay with. And then so you're kind of expected to bang out everything Sunday. You're sort of there all night Sunday. Some people, like Mikey Day, you would see writing right up until the next morning, right up until we have to do the read through on Wednesday. And on Wednesday, that's when everyone who works there, everyone I mentioned before, but now all the crew, all the producers, all the other people involved would all sit in this large room, and they would read probably 75% of the sketches that were written the night before. And then you're sort of judging it by how much people are laughing. Though that's not always what gets a sketch picked. Uh, and you're narrowing it down to like a dozen sketches. Everyone at the end of the read through, about an hour later, they see a bulletin board, and they would see which sketches got picked, and that would mean they know who has to develop something. If it's a pre-tape, obviously you start planning out when and how it's going to get shot. Thursday is when some people would be filming pre-tapes, but for the most part, Thursday is when you're doing punch-up. All the writers would be split into two different groups, and those two different groups would go through half the sketches that were chosen. They would see if they can add jokes to it, see if they can make it funnier, improve upon it in any way. And then Friday is pretty much filming the pre-tapes and rehearsing the live sketches. And then Saturday, you do the show 3 times. Do a run through, a dress rehearsal with an audience, and then the live show.
Great. And then for a sketch like I Am Pete, did you initially pitch that idea and it went how it went, or were there some alterations that you had to make through rehearsal and whatnot?
The I Am Pete, the Barbie parody one, that was yeah, that was Pete's idea initially, and it was the same process pretty much where you tell them in advance that you want to do something, and then there's talk. You say, okay, well, is there any reason we can't do this? Is there anyone who's going to be on the show that this would be? You sort of figure that out, and it seemed like it was clearly going to be a good sketch. So, yeah, that one I think we didn't know that was. I think we didn't find out until like probably Wednesday night that was going to get made, and so then you immediately you go and you that's the thing about the show is that the crew is the most impressive part of it. That they have this ability to throw together these really well produced sketches, both live and pre-tape, in such a short amount of time. It really speaks to how well oiled the company is. But
Absolutely.
yeah, it was pretty standard from what I recall. The video. I mean, it was definitely not an easy one to shoot. I mean, that was really like an ambitious one that they really pulled off well. But yeah, that's pretty much the process with any pre-tape. You're writing a script, you're reading through it. You might sing it at the read through. You kind of want to produce it a bit for the read through. You want to make sure everyone gets their cues and go to the sound guy in advance, make sure everything's ready. Because you kind of, sometimes you need to perform it to see how it's supposed to be.
Great. And that was such a great sketch, so I appreciate what you did with it. What was the
Oh, I didn't
writing?
do much with that. That was Pete.
Oh, it
That was
was.
Pete. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Well,
I
it
didn't.
was great
I've
anyways.
never done much with the songs. I would add a lyric or two, but those were never real thing, honestly.
Gotcha. Well, thank you anyway. What was the writing process surrounding King of Staten Island? I'm just curious as to how the concept developed, Judd's influence, and what was it like to collaborate with Bill Burr?
Well, for King of Staten Island, basically, Pete, Judd, and I had been in talks of writing a movie previously to that. Before Pete was on SNL at all, Judd had talked to us about a blind script contract, about writing something together. And then once Pete was on SNL and I was there also, we were talking about a script that Judd had the idea for that we kicked around, but never got as far with. And then a few years later, around 20, I guess 18, something like that. We had the time. We started talking to Judd about doing this again, where we would really this time really build a movie from the ground up and really center it around Pete. So it started with Pete, me, Judd, and just maybe a few extra people. Barry, a producer, was very heavily involved. We just started talking about Pete's life, talking about just sort of trying to build a story out of it, and decided to make it a story about Pete, but not celebrity Pete. Sort of a story about this person if he wasn't famous. Um, and Pete and I had kicked around a previous script that doesn't really have any connection to it, but it was sort of a jumping off point about like having to do with his mother and the real story of her having not dated her entire life since getting, since separating from her husband, who then passed away in 9/11. Um, so from that point on, uh, we got a very basic story, very, very basic plot down. And then Judd had me start writing scripts. Basically, Judd was like, write the movie. Just write the movie just from what we have. Just write an outline. First write like an outline, then write another outline, write three or four outlines, just different ways of doing it, and then just start writing the movie. And the idea was I wrote a copy of the movie. I wrote a draft, a fresh draft. I give it to Judd. He changes everything, hands it back to me. I change everything, hand it back to him. At the same time, we're having conversations with Pete. We're talking to Pete about like, what kind of scenes he envisions, what kind of things could happen. He's weighing in on stuff. So that was kind of the process that like I would write, a different version of the movie several times. Judd really believes in that kind of volume work where you write something and you really get it down and you learn new things every time you sort of rewrite it. So like a funny example for the movie would be in my original drafts, like because everything changes constantly. One thing that didn't really change was the Action Bronson scene. That actually was the scene that I wrote in the very early version of it. That while a lot of stuff that I would have been writing would make it into the script in different ways, very very different versions, very where everything's being rewritten, deconstructed, reconstructed. That scene, oddly enough, stayed very close to the way it was originally written, right up until the end. So that's just how things happen. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that
then
scene is so
in the
funny.
process of filming, you're constantly rewriting everything. You're constantly punching up. You're constantly trying to pitch new things. Judd would want several different versions of every joke, which I believe in strongly. Some actors don't like that. Some actors do not like being yelled at, having a line they never heard just yelled at the last second while you're on stage, well, like while you're on screen to try. But I mean, I think that's the only way comedy works is you have to be loose, you have to be in the moment. So there are so many different versions of this movie that honestly I wish I could have, just gone into editing and just made like, here's the most joke heavy version, here's, this.
That'd be really cool to see one day if you end up doing that. But otherwise, it's an awesome movie and I loved it. And the Action Bronson scene is hilarious.
No, thanks. It was I mean, it was just really really amazing to just get the opportunity to work with someone like Judd who, is just everything you want to learn, everything you want to get to in terms of just understanding story. I think that's really what I love the most about that because it's something that's not easy for me is like really creating a whole cloth story. And Judd is someone who can really like envision everything at once, which is such a hard thing to do hard to really process an entire film all at once and really see, does this work?
My next question is about Pete, if you don't mind me asking. I'm wondering, how would you describe your relationship with him, and when did you realize that you and him had a special connection that would make such funny material?
I mean, we're very, very close friends. We have been for many years. You know, it's not just working. You know, we spend a lot of our time together. When we first started becoming friends, having done stand up together when he was around 18, uh, we started hanging out a little bit. We had mutual friends. He was in LA doing some work, and we hung out. And it was like maybe a year or two later that he had gotten this sort of offer to try to put together a web series for Comedy Central that he basically asked if I wanted to, take a shot at with him, and and he said he like tried writing it alone with other people. It just didn't really work, and it came out so easily when we were writing together that it just became clear that we had a good rapport. We had a good kind of sensibility. We have a kind of similar idea of what's funny, of what we like. I think we're kind of similar in that way, and that it just worked. And we started writing together, and it just became clear that like, oh, we can do this. We can generate this without a ton of effort, even though it should take effort. But it was the idea that like it just felt natural. We started writing. I think first we wrote like a script that we never made. Um, I think I wanted to call it the Breaker Upper Boys. It's about a guy who tricks his friends into breaking up their relationships.
That's funny.
Yeah, and oddly enough, one of the scripts we had, I swear to God, before Pete met Ariana Grande, we had written a script about Pete being this like college basketball player who doesn't make it to the big league, who doesn't make it to the NBA, but his girlfriend becomes a major pop star.
Wow.
And it's like he has to live with the idea that he's like the guy that got famously dumped by a pop star, like a really popular song. And then we were like, oh my God, no one, if we made this movie, no one would believe that we wrote this before he started dating Ariana.
Yeah, that is fascinating. A really cool story. If you can go back to when you were writing your first sketch for SNL, with all that you've learned, what would the more experienced Dave Sirus tell his younger self about the fundamentals of great sketch writing?
That Lorne is the one who's going to be reading the action notes, so keep them brief.
That's good. I love Bupkis, by the way, and I'd
Thank you.
like to ask you about it. And I want
Yeah,
to ask you about writing for Joe Pesci in particular. Since he
sure.
chooses
Yeah.
his projects very carefully, I'm curious as to how he got involved and what was it like writing for him.
I think he just got involved because he liked Pete and he got along with him and just thought this will be fun. It was just sort of Pete just being like himself that seemed to make Pesci want to get on board and want to have fun with us, which was incredibly privileged. I mean, the guy hasn't done TV in like 40 years probably. I mean, Pesci's kind of exactly what you expect. He's not putting on much of an act. He is a tough, you know, uh, he's that guy. He's a tough Jersey dude or New York, New Jersey kind of guy who just doesn't mess around, and he's got a big heart, and he is not someone anyone should ever fuck with.
Right.
It's really fun. I mean, the fact that I got to even interact with him on camera, the fact that I got to, it's one of those things where like you really you really like that feeling usually, I think, of getting to see someone saying something you wrote for the first time. I remember the first thing I got on SNL, it was something Michael Che was reading. I was like, yeah, I wrote that and it's on TV now. The first time I saw Triumph saying something I wrote, and it was the same thing with Pesci. It was like, oh, this is cool. Um, I actually think that I have a good sense also because I'm from Brooklyn and Jersey. I have a good sense of writing for guys like like Pesci. I have a good sense of like how they speak. There's certain, like, I would even early on be like, trust me, he would say it this way. There's just a very specific kind of way that that language goes. And I mean, and also with Pesci is like, you don't want him to not say something because he's not going to say something he doesn't like. He doesn't have to. So you want to write in a sense like, I want this to be all stuff he has fun saying that he wants to do. Um, but I mean, it was really fun, and like he's such a good actor that he'll elevate whatever you give him. And at the same time, if he doesn't like something, you're kind of like, you know what, you're probably right. Because I mean, the character is very Joe Pesci. It's
Yeah.
if Joe doesn't like something that the Joe character would do, probably for a good reason. And honestly, he was great in terms of like he would do whatever. Like he was pretty good in terms of like being able to take something we gave him and make it work and make it feel real. So yeah, I mean, getting to write for Joe Pesci. I mean, we had a lot of really cool, famous people on that show. That was super, super lucky of us to get.
Yeah, the cast is stacked. It's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, no, Joe is Joe. It was also just amazing getting to hang out with Joe, also because he's Joe Pesci.
Yeah.
I had there was a lot of like little things that sometimes you have a lot of ideas you can't necessarily use, um, but there was always there was always so many fun things I wanted to do with the fact that we had Joe Pesci. Like I even had an idea. I would have loved to have done this. I wanted to have Pete actually watching Home Alone in his trailer while he's all high, and then when it cuts to the scene Joe Pesci's in, it's Danny DeVito. I just thought it'd be so funny, just cutting Danny DeVito like, "We're the wet bandits."
That's incredible.
I wanted that so bad.
Yeah, everyone would love to see that. If it, yeah, that's great. Um, what advice would you give to aspiring comedy writers who would love to work for SNL?
But there are a lot of other shows out there, and any way you can get your foot in the door is fine. It doesn't have to be SNL. SNL is though it is actually a really great place for people to start out because a lot of writers at SNL it's their first writing job. It is where a lot of people got their start. If you want to get on SNL, there isn't really that much of a straight line to it. You have to make a name for yourself in stand up or podcasting or, you know, uh, live sketch, taped sketch, improv. You have to impress people. You have to be someone that they think they can make money off of. It's not just enough to have good material. You have to have proven you have good material. You have to have gotten eyes on yourself before. There's no easy way. Um, it just if there was, everyone would do it. I think the best way to really make a career, get on SNL, is in my experience, is you have to really befriend someone who is way more famous than you and make them believe that they will fail without you. At least that's what happened to me. But I think it's honestly I can't. You have to break out. You have to show people what you can do in a way that there's numbers. It's not
Mhm.
like maybe in the past where it could be more audition based.
I have one last question. I'm wondering about your thoughts surrounding the new SNL movie coming out next month, if you have any thoughts about it.
I mean, I just don't know that much about it. I'm excited to see it. I'm really interested. It's always super weird to see actors playing people in real life because it's like with that Donald Sterling documentary. You're just like you're looking at it like this is who is playing these players that are also actors. Like it's I mean yeah, I wish I had more to say about it because it's like it's interesting. I wish the movie, to be honest, I would love to see a movie that really went through all the years, because I'm not as interested in the 1970s SNL as I am in like the 80s and 90s one.
Right.
I don't know if you know this, the very early SNL episodes weren't really good. Like the very early ones, like the Muppets. Still, like I'm not. I apologize. I know people love them, but like they're not the sketches people think of when they think of how great SNL is. It kind of took like a little while for them to really find their footing. I think like it was a very weird show, and it's also it's partially because it was so long ago that people like us don't really have the connection to what the sensibilities were then. So that's why like I think a lot of us like what SNL was when we were kids. So that's why I gravitate towards the 80s and 90s one. And, Jay Moore, for example, once said that he thought the best years of SNL were like the early 80s, which almost everyone agrees are the worst years ever. Because actually, the 70s SNL was really great, but it was like Parks and Rec. Like they clearly needed time to figure out the show before it got to where it was. And I hope that they recognize that in the movie. I hope that they kind of acknowledge that like the show was sweaty at first. It had to really figure stuff out. Like people forget the Muppets were on it for God's sake. Like it was a different show before like people like Belushi and you know and I think and Aykroyd were really like firing all cylinders and really like figuring out what's funny because I mean there's so many great Aykroyd and Belushi specifically sketches. But it is funny how like they had to figure this out. Like I hope that they really show that like this was like an this was like, probably like it was probably like an ugly process of like figuring out how do you make this show for TV something that was so different than anything that had existed. Um, I just hope I hope it's very true to the way things were, and I assume it will be. It seems like it's. I've heard a lot of buzz. I've heard it's really good. Um, but yeah, no, I would have loved to have seen like 1991 also. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
the movie's just the original SNL, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have loved to have seen like the year when they brought in like Adam Sandler and Chris Farley, and they already had Phil Hartman there, and it was already this like juggernaut of a show. Um, there was a lot of sketches that people don't know existed anymore from those days that are crazy
Hmm.
that you would never do now. But no, I think the movie I'm really interested in. I'm so curious to see how the actor playing Lorne does it because everyone does a Lorne impression that doesn't sound like Lorne. That I can't help but wonder, like, is he going to do Doctor Evil or is he going to actually figure out how to really do a Lorne impression?
Right.
Now, did you ever see Brain Candy?
I have not.
Brain Candy is the Kids in the Hall movie. It's amazing, and uh, one of the Mark McKinney plays basically Lorne Michaels in the movie,
Oh, wow.
which is like, and if you once you watch the movie, there's no question. It's not like Doctor Evil where someone had to tell you. Anyone who watches this movie knew who Lorne Michaels is. It's like, oh wow, he's doing evil Lorne as the villain of this movie.
I really appreciate your time and speaking with me and just giving everybody all the insights and your experience as to how you make such great material. So it's an honor to speak with you. Thank you so much for watching my conversation with Dave Sirus. Once we hit 250 subscribers, I'll be gifting a very special DVD of the first season of SNL. All you have to do to win is subscribe and DM me on Instagram what you enjoyed most from my interview with Dave. From then, I'll pick one winner and the SNL DVD will be all yours. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from you.